Good morning or good afternoon. Hello to everyone who made it to our webinar, Human CX, Boost Response Rates and Increase CX Impact. I hope everyone is doing great and excited for what's to come today. My name is Valeria and I'll be your moderator today. So just to go over today's talking points, we will begin by defining human CX and how it will significantly impact your CX efforts. Then we will circle about the importance of active listening, regardless of the industry or the moment. Afterwards, we will touch base on impactful and actionable surveys and how to move away from traditional and ineffective implementations. And finally, we will showcase why it is essential to keep listening and go further with collected feedback and how to act on it. And towards the end, we will finish this webinar with some final thoughts, and we will have some time for a live Q&A at the very end. So please, if you have any questions that comes up during the webinar, just drop a line in the Q&A section. Today we have two great panelists. Our first is Leslie Boucher. She is ORI's VP of Consulting, and she's a CX expert with over 25 years of experience as a senior executive. And our second panelist is David Solana, and David is OPINATOR's co-founder and CMO with over 10 years of experience bringing innovation to customer experience. A little about OPINATOR. In a nutshell, OPINATOR is a CX management platform that helps leading companies to bring the human touch to customer experience, enabling businesses to boost response rates in customer experience, voice of the customer, or NPS programs, and gather better insights. Thanks to OPINATOR's innovation and technology, both B2B and B2C companies over 25 countries are measuring customer experience in a much more personalized, smart, and actionable way. And with that said, I will pass it on to you, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Valeria. Just really pleased to be here. So just a little bit about ORI. We are a research and data analytics firm, specializing actually in what we're talking about here today. So gathering effective data, really making the most of that precious moment where a customer is willing to give us feedback and then acting on that to strengthen the customer experience. And we're a big believer in using all the data you have. We'll talk a little bit more later about structured and unstructured data. But we've been in business for over 30 years, pretty proud of our track record, and we're a services firm. So we do partner with best-in-class technology firms, such as OPINATOR, to make sure we're bringing really outstanding services and technology and software to our clients as needed. So I want to really thank OPINATOR for this opportunity, one of our favorite partners, don't tell the others, to share with you all today. So, a couple of minutes on what we do for a living, why we get up in the morning and go to work. We are very focused on the teal right-hand side of this circle in understanding what customers need, what they want, where they're heading, how do we keep up with them, and then understanding how obviously your organization might be meeting those needs from their perspective. So we do everything a research company would be expected to do, the surveys, the data mining, interviews, focus groups, and a really strong focus over the last few years on that advanced text analytics and unstructured data mining, making sure we're really pulling all of the information in that we can possibly use, then moving over to the left-hand side and taking action, because what's the point of doing the research if we don't do anything with it? So we do some consulting on making sure people can use what they are learning. Just a couple of examples of clients. We work with the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in the U.S. government, had that contract for over 10 years. Commercial organizations, small, medium, and large, with quite a bit of work in the financial sector, as well as other service arenas and associations. And the only reason I mention that is we're kind of unique in being able to work across 3 different types of clients, and we can cross-pollinate, share ideas we learn in one arena with others. So with no further ado, why are we talking about human CX? And wanted to make sure we had some sort of shared definitions before we started. In order to do that, I just want to back up a second. I suspect that people on the call are CX enthusiasts and know this type of statistic, but just to level set at the beginning, you know, Rockefeller did this study about why customers leave and discovered that 68% of the time it was due to poor customer experience versus 14% of the time where someone was citing dissatisfaction with a service or a product. And I find this absolutely fascinating because when we get in with organizations, they often, you know, when they're concerned about revenue growth and sales and customer churn, they'll go to the product or the service and start talking about how can I tweak that, how can I improve that. And sitting there on the left-hand side is this big orange block of customer experience where it really may be more on how you're interacting with your customer and what their end game experience is as opposed to the actual product or service. So obviously, pretty fundamental issue. And then I think before we launch into human CX, I wanted to just also share that, you know, the title even suggests human CX. People might think, oh, that's a bit squishy or, you know, a little fuzzy. And I think there's absolutely nothing soft about the return on investment that can happen from stronger customer engagement. So just a brief example, this is a senior executive who shared this at a conference I was speaking at a few years ago. He had been made the chief customer officer for a global software development firm kind of overnight. He got this role and he was very frank with us. He said, you know, we weren't customer friendly, we weren't customer oriented, we're a pretty aggressive organization. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to get the attention of my colleagues and the budget I needed unless I could really show the ROI. So interestingly, he bucketed his customers into these 4 categories, ranging from the left-hand side, transactional buyer, over to the right-hand side, customer advocate, and was able to show that on average, the customer advocate spent over 9 times the amount of money that the transactional one-and-done type of buyer did. This gave him the opportunity then to seek and get a budget for what he called a relentless focus on customer feedback, ease of doing business, both of which we're going to talk about here today, and onward down the list, customer and employee engagement. So I use this chart all the time, and we will be sending out the slides if anybody wants to borrow it and use it. I just think it's a fabulous example of why this matters and that it's not soft and squishy. It's really hardcore bottom line financial implications. But now expanding on that and saying, okay, but from a human CX perspective, what are we talking about? I thought the Wall Street Journal author here, Anthony Stephen, did a great job. We don't wake up in the morning as customers, you know, we don't take our first cup of coffee and think, oh, I'm the end user of this coffee, right? So why do we as businesses insist on grouping people with labels and buckets when above all else, we're messy, inconsistent, and perhaps most of all, emotional? I think that's going to be the underlying current of what we're sharing today, is that human CX involves recognizing the human dynamic of the relationship. Why is this all relevant? Again, customer retention, keeping who we have, growing what we have is such an important engine of growth, really critical for businesses to understand how we connect and do it in such a way where it's truly all about them. So again, we'll show examples and ideas on how to make it not about us, but about them. And that includes how we seek feedback, right? Your survey is a touch point and it can help or hinder the relationship. We want to make sure we really honor their time when customers take the time to give us feedback. So doing that very carefully, we believe, is a key part of human CX. And what does this all imply? Well, it implies a fundamental shift for many, not all perhaps, but for many, in how we approach all aspects of our business, and particularly how we engage customers, employees, and partners. So David's going to share in a few minutes some examples of, well, what does that look like? You know, what is a human CX type of survey? How does that actually transpire? How do we do that? And I'm going to share, just before he does that, just a little bit about the approach, right? Like fundamentally, how do we want to think about designing the questions? What do we want to take into account? And it may not surprise you that the thing I want to talk about here, first and foremost, is active listening. In any kind of human relationship, when we stop and really get to the bottom of it, often there's an issue around active listening, right? And I think this study from Bain and Company underscores the challenge that we're facing. Companies were asked whether or not they thought they were customer-centric. 80% of those companies said yes, they did, but not surprisingly, quite a gap in that only 8% of customers agreed. And this study, this one is from quite a few years ago now, but it has been replicated and repeated, and there's always a stark contrast, right, between how we feel we're doing and how customers feel we're doing. And so the question becomes then, all right, so what can we do about that? And we fundamentally believe this mantra, seek first to understand, needs to apply in our survey design thinking, right? And we've all been in this situation where somebody's in our face saying, you know, you say you're listening, but you clearly don't understand. And so the issue from our perspective then is if we are trying to seek first to understand, we believe, and ORI strongly supports this, understanding starts with asking the right questions. So here's a sort of more holistic framework to asking the questions that we use. This is not unique to us. This is a framework that's well known and out there. I'm just going to give you the ORI angle on this. The success questions in your survey design, those are pretty straightforward, and most of us already do that, right? We ask some sort of a satisfaction question, maybe a net promoter score. That one's starting to get over into the emotion circle a little bit, but typically we've got the success questions under control. Where things get a little more interesting is on the emotion questions. You know, this really links back to the theme of human CX, right? If we are messy and inconsistent and emotional, we really want to ask questions of our customers that allows their voice to be heard and allows them to speak. Structured on a scale of 1 to 5 questions really fall flat here. You know, if you say, so on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy are you? You know, it just kind of doesn't really resonate and kind of takes the wind right out of the balloon as you say it. When you ask somebody an open-ended question, and, you know, some of my favorites, you know, what would you like to share with us? You might get emotion, you might get something completely different, but you're not guiding the witness, right? You are just saying, what would you like to share with us? Another one of my favorite questions is, what should we know that we have not asked? Great question, because, you know, in designing surveys, we're often trying to figure out what we want them to tell us. Much better question is, in my opinion, what should we know that we have not asked? So open-ended questions there are quite key. We'll come back to this whole notion of unstructured data in a few minutes. Last thing I'll share is on effort. Effort is a leading indicator of churn for customers. If your customer is saying or expressing frustration that you are hard to work with, and again, think about that gap between in the Bain study between what you think and what they think actually really matters. And the low-hanging fruit we've seen here when we've been able to identify for customers that there's some effort issue that they were not aware of, huge financial implications, because then we can keep those customers and increase our retention rates. So I'll come back to effort later. It is an area in the diving deeper that I think is really important. But that's just sort of the holistic framework that we pursue and we suggest. And just ask yourself, when you're designing a questionnaire, you know, oftentimes we just take out last year's and use that one again with a few tweaks. It helps just to step back and really look at, okay, where am I? Have I really addressed all 3 aspects of this? And am I capturing the human nature of this interaction? So surveys being impactful and actionable, I'm just going to share a few more ideas about how, from a research and consulting perspective, we go at this, and then David's going to give you some examples. He's the interesting part. He gets to show the really brilliant visuals. I just give you the theory here. But know your goals, right? And I know this sounds like a bit of a, perhaps, yeah, I kind of knew that idea, but the number of times that we go into an organization and when we're able to ask, well, how are you going to use this information? Or could you give me examples of where you've used the data you collected last time from that question, how has that impacted operations? How has that actually impacted customer experience? And, you know, why are you asking this question? And we can go in as outsiders and probe and just ask the innocent question that really gets people to sort of stop and go, oh yeah, wait, maybe we should change up, right? Because given that our goals have shifted, our questions should have shifted. We never use that information anyway, so knowing your key goals is really important. Ask only those questions that are necessary, right? You should know where they live, what they bought from you, whatever data you already have about them, making sure that you're not repeating that in the survey. We've had customers say, you know, it's really kind of not just annoying, but almost offensive that a vendor didn't know the things that they asked me, right? So if you want to create a relationship and make that relationship strong, don't go back to the beginning and ask them those basic questions if you can avoid it. And then the main thing that David's now going to talk about in this human CX notion, and probably the core of what we're sharing in this first part of the webinar, is you want to emulate a conversation, right? In a human conversation, you want it to be interesting, right? And you want to use logic. Certainly if you were in a conversation with somebody and they were to say, I am so frustrated with you, this would not be the ideal time to say, oh, but could you introduce me to one of your friends perhaps so we could go out this weekend, right? So using logic in the surveys, it's technically possible. We should be doing it to keep our surveys more like a conversation, and then allow their voice to be heard. As I mentioned, you know, don't prescribe the answers. So many of surveys really have an inherent bias in the structured questions, and the more we can use open-ended questions, the more we can get away from that. Last thing I'll share here before I hand it over to David is the idea of pulse surveys. You know, the survey fatigue is dramatic. We are all over-surveyed. And so using things that are not 40 questions long, because they're not going to answer them, but really pulse surveys where you take the feedback, you make the action. That's an important part we'll expand on as well. But quick feedback, quick action, and keeping things short. Okay, so let me just pass it over to David, and he will take it from here.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, hi everyone. My name is David Solana. I'm co-founder and CMO of OPINATOR, and picking up exactly where Leslie was. Keep it interesting, use logic, and allow your voice or their voice to be heard. And those are exactly the three things that we had in mind when we started OPINATOR, when we started the company 10 years ago. People were saying, surveys are dead. We are unable to connect with their customers, to listen to their voices, to measure their experiences. And, it's no wonder that that was happening, because most companies, even today, what they're using to listen to their customers is, forms like the ones that you're seeing on your screen, endless forms with very traditional elements of interaction, actually pre-digital kind of forms, right? So like, they resemble the pen and paper forms. And we, said we need to change this. This is the past, response rates are going down. There is huge fatigue, as Leslie was saying. What can we do to change this, to help companies, to enable them to really connect with their customers, to listen to them, to measure their experience in a completely new way? How did we do that? Well, the first thing was to change the interface, enable businesses to generate a completely different kind of experience, much more visual, engaging, personalized, and actionable. And you can do that over multiple channels. And basically, when you look at the main pillars, the three pillars of OPINATOR, those correspond precisely to keeping the conversation interesting with very engaging and visual formats of interaction that we call OPs. Then the second pillar is about the logic that Leslie mentioned. And we're not just talking here about your traditional conditional jumps, very basic things. Of course, you can do that in Opinator with OPs, but you can go way beyond that by combining data that someone is giving you in real time through an OP, by responding to questions, by, moving sliders, by interacting with those, engaging forms, and at the same time combine that with data that you might already have about someone, who that person is, what segment it belongs to, what kind of persona, etc., etc., to, make decisions in real time. And that is very powerful indeed, because you're not just, collecting information, but, you're acting on information in real time. And the third pillar is analytics and close the loop. And of course, here we have a full engine of quantitative and qualitative analysis. And we have, excellent partners such as Clarabridge that is specialized in analyzing those verbatims, those free comments, those free texts. Opinator has been named, a voice of customer specialist by Forrester, so we have been included in a very, very short list. Very proud of that milestone. And what I'm going to do now is to show you how you can start, interacting with your customers in a much more conversational way, and how to, say goodbye to those old, boring surveys. So you're looking here at your first OP. What is an OP? An OP is a format for building surveys, multimedia forms, etc. And you can see right away that you have here some elements that you can use to interact with your target audiences that are, not your typical radio buttons or check boxes. They're much more advanced kind of elements. And this is very important because, the forms themselves become an extension of your brand. And that is something that, our clients, businesses of all sizes are telling us loud and clear. We need to interact with our customers using our own products, our own services. Opinator is based on building blocks. As you can see here, you can use different building blocks. It's all graphical. And the first benefit that you're going to see is a very significant increase, sometimes spectacular increase in response rates. We've seen increases of 10 times, 12 times, 15 times in the response rates that companies were getting with those old traditional surveys when they moved to Opinator. As you can see, tons of different elements of interaction to create that connection with your audience. Like here, you have this new kind of drag and drop, and again, the number of possibilities is just unlimited. Okay. So the second thing, as we said, is that you can use logic within an OP, or to move from one OP to another to create micro customer journeys. You can include things like free text boxes that you can see here, all right? And they can be conditional as well. So you can start collecting unstructured data, which is very valuable to get intelligence, to get new insights that maybe you are not going after explicitly, through a particular question, but it's things that openly, spontaneously, people are going to be telling you. And just let me give you a very simple example of how you can create a different type of interaction, kind of a conversation with your audiences. For instance, in this case, in the channel, these OPs could be embedded anywhere. This could be on a website. They're completely responsive, so they're going to be optimized. Their look and feel for any device that your customers might be interacting with you from. So here, let's say that this person got a survey over email or over a text message or their mobile application. When they click and they select some options, depending on what they're saying, they could get one kind of response. But if that person responded in or gave different type of feedback, the possibilities would be different. So for instance, in this case, we are linking the voice of the customer when this company gets very positive feedback to a referral program. So instead of just saying would you recommend me, why don't you recommend us? Okay, so you're actually give them the opportunity to generate value and even revenue within the listening process. And with that, I'll pass it back to Leslie.
Thank you, David. Okay, so going further, those were great examples, and I think, again, so much more human, so much more interactive and visually interesting, right? So I think those met absolutely the building blocks of keep it interesting, use logic, and let their voice be heard. So one of the things we had committed to doing was to talk about, okay, but how do you really develop some deep customer understanding? And I think in thinking about what to share with you all, level of effort really kept coming back to me and sticking out as, again, such a leading indicator of churn, understanding where your customers might be finding you easy or difficult to work with, very important. So two possibilities here to assess level of effort. The first one, you can do a classic structured scale question. And this is good when you have a hypothesis, right? You believe, for example, you've got some problem with online ordering, right? So asking the question, the company made it easy for me to place my order online. Agree, disagree, pretty classic. The downside of this is if somebody has something they wanted to share with you that didn't relate to online ordering, you haven't given them the opportunity to ask that. So even if you use a structured question, I would recommend putting an option to, tell me more, put a little open-ended box underneath that. But this is what you want to do if you really focused on, I need to learn what they think about online ordering. I think the open-ended question can be so much more powerful, and it doesn't lead the witness if you were just to say, tell us about your online shopping experience. Leads the witness a little bit because you're still saying online shopping. You could say, tell us about your overall experience. So choices to be made there, but I think it's a much more organic data collection exercise when you use the open-ended feedback. David mentioned a partner, Clarabridge, there. That's actually how we got to know OPINATOR, was through our Clarabridge partner. And frankly, they've got a fabulous advanced algorithms that allow you to actually detect when somebody is expressing frustration in the language. So one of the things, if you're out there looking for some technology to help you mine all this open-ended feedback, and let's face it, you're going to run into that if you ask more open-ended questions, you need to have some technology to help you. There are great choices out there. We happen to think Clarabridge is one of the better ones for really advanced analytics. You want something that I would suggest you ask how long it's been out in the field learning, because it's machine learning, right? And you don't want it learning on your dime. You want it to have already been tested in several industries and be pretty advanced. And you also want it to understand context. Like everybody on this webinar has a different type of business, and the language has context around it, right? So when we were working, I'll share in a minute, a healthcare example, working with an organization where words like labor and blood and emergency room, those were not bad things. Those were just context things if you're of their world. So you need to be able to neutralize that and be able to really get after what's the sentiment that somebody is sharing and are they expressing level of effort. So I would suggest that's one key thing in going further. The other one is really leveraging all of your data, right? So we talk about systematic listening. Over in this right-hand side, this teal oval, it's talking about all the different kind of unstructured data, which could probably, in a less geeky way, be referred to as customer commentary, right? Where they're talking or speaking. So many places, in addition to surveys, yes, the survey's got a key component of it, but they're also talking about you on chat, in your call centers. They're sharing information with you. They're talking about you on social media. So all of those different sources of customer commentary, you know, and factually, likely at least 80% of the total, because this statistic was from about 3 years ago. So 80% of all data at that time was unstructured. 20% is that little orange square over on the left-hand side, and that's where most of us have very comfortably lived from an analysis point of view for a long time. You know, 5 years ago, if you'd asked ORI, well, what kind of data do you work with? It was all over here on the left-hand side, you know, the stuff that fits in a nice Excel spreadsheet and is easy to add up and divide. But now, because of the technology advancements, you really can pull all this data in. Again, Clarabridge has an OmniSource solution, so we use them for that. But, you know, thinking about how can I take every piece of information I have and use it to best effect, right? Deepen your understanding through level of effort, deepen your understanding by leveraging all the data that you have. So just, you know, one example of what does deep understanding look like, just to kind of add perspective to, well, but how does this actually, you know, work out in the end? We worked with a large healthcare organization where, man, was their data siloed. It took a while for us to even figure out how many different surveys were sitting in different departmental silos, right? And so therefore, largely underutilized feedback, maybe a challenge that some of you face. We were able to go through and mine the open-ended customer commentary to detect the themes, the sentiment, the behaviors, the preferences, and then really in a matter of weeks, through our use of technology partnership, really analyze large volumes of structure and text, you know, customer commentary that previously the VP we were working with said, you know, that took us months of manual coding and numerous staff members. So they weren't about to do it again because it had taken too long the first time. We were able to just really get in there and get that to them quickly. And I think the outcome that we're really proud of actually is in this situation, we detected the work of our team found there was a segment of healthcare workers who were hesitating recommending a vaccine when the vaccine was actually really a good thing to be recommending. But they were hesitant because of the circumstances. I can't share the details, but they were able to develop a new educational video and encourage those healthcare workers to promote that vaccine. 6 months ago when we did that work, it wasn't quite as topical or as relevant as it is today, but given where we are with the whole world of discussions around vaccines, we're particularly proud of this outcome. So last thing I wanted to share before giving it back to David to give some more examples of what does it look like when you have a deeper understanding is this whole idea of committing to how you will use their feedback. You know, there are transactional feedback loops, and you may have those where you're identifying in real time using the platform that you use feedback that tells you actions required. Okay, that's great. The area that I think tends to get missed a little bit is the overall feedback commitment, where at the outset you're saying, I'm going to honor the commitment of time and effort by our customers, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to use their data, your data, right? I'm going to tell you in advance, and then I will actually what you've learned. I think word warning here, and it's something I believe very strongly, and that is don't solicit feedback at all, frankly, without a solid analysis and communication plan. You really don't want to be in the situation of a client we had. We came in and they'd gotten, it was a large Fortune 100 insurance company, and they'd gotten very excited about customer experience, which was great. They'd launched some surveys, they were doing some individual interviews, But when asked, okay, but who's going to do the analysis of that, and how are you providing feedback back to the client, there was this sort of stunned, oh yeah, we haven't really gotten there yet. And that's not uncommon. That happens, right? But nothing worse for customer experience than to consistently ask for feedback and then not use it, right? Or appear to not use it. So making sure that you really are committing and honoring their time and effort by telling them in advance how you're going to use that information. So with that, let me hand it back to David, who's going to share a few more dynamic examples of what all this might look like.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Leslie. Can you see my screen?
Yes, thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so you need to be able to get intelligence, real insights out of data. That's the challenge. How do you do that? I mean, you need to, first of all, be able to, in real time, analyze all the quantitative data that you're getting, and at the same time, be able to, as we said before, get knowledge from your from the texts, the verbatims that your customers are sending you through the OPs. And in OPINATOR, what we did was to, and the fundamental concept here is very similar to what we did with the OPs, right? It's all modular. It's all based on building blocks. Instead of saying, we have this type of dashboard and that's it, or per industry or whatever it is, we enable companies to generate the dashboards with the information that they need, that is relevant to them. Okay, and typically, that information comes in several, could be of several types, or the different analysis. First of all, you could have, main indicators, CSAT, Net Promoter Score, customer loyalty index, things like that. And you may want to have to see the evolution. You might want to have a segmented view of that particular metric or indicator, or you could start doing, more advanced things like, the evolution over time of that metric, or, even how it evolves over a particular customer journey. So here you can analyze very precisely, and that's going to enable you to find out, where the points of customer effort are in your particular customer journeys. Then, of course, you could start doing, much more advanced things by applying different mathematical functions or even statistical functions like a key driver analysis. So which driver is impacting a particular metric in the most significant way, all right? So here, speed of operation, the correlation with NPS is very high. So that's, quite likely the driver that you should be acting upon. And then from there, you can do all sorts of, particular analysis between two variables, or even, start doing more advanced things like, instead of just looking at the present and the past, start projecting things into the future with predictive analysis. At the same time, you can combine this with categorization, with effort analysis, sentiment analysis, and of course that belongs into the realm of text analytics. As I said, it's all based on building blocks and completely customizable, fully adapted to each brand. So you can see that this dashboard is very different from the one you had. And actually, with OPINATOR, it's very easy to build not just a dashboard, but a hierarchy of dashboards. And then you can include, all the text analytics information, all the tickets, case management, how they're scaled, et cetera, et cetera. Again, all very adaptable, completely tailored to your needs. And with that, I'll get it back to you, Leslie.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So final thoughts, and I'm thrilled to say we've got time for questions, and Valeria has been collecting them. If you have any questions, now would be a good time to submit them. But just just final thoughts on all of this before we go back and forth with Q&A. I think the main message of what we've been sharing today is that human customer experience is really a question of perspective, right? Because it's about how do we treat our customers as the individuals that they are. And I think most of us are familiar with the golden rule, do unto others as we would have them do unto you. I think if I was to summarize everything we've been sharing today, and certainly the mantra that ORI and OPINATOR live by, frankly, is the platinum rule. And the platinum rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them, right? So a lot of what we've been sharing is about just shifting perspective, changing up what you've typically done, and really breaking free from some of the previous constraints of, well, we've always done it this way. You know, can you get people to shift and start thinking, your colleagues and coworkers to start thinking about this from the platinum rule perspective? Again, this slide is one I use all the time when getting people to start thinking about customer experience, basically, but also human customer experience. And if that's helpful to you and you want to provoke a discussion with your team, we're happy to, when we share this with you, just feel free to use it as you see fit. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Valeria, and we'll do Q&A.
Great. Thank you very much, Leslie and David. That was wonderful. I do have a couple of questions that are coming through the bot right here to the chat. So I also have other questions that we received over email previously. So let's go ahead and tackle the ones that we're receiving in real time, if that works. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I see the first one. It is asking, aren't the open-ended questions more difficult to classify in a database? How to manage them without losing time and give proper and quick response?
That's a great one. David, you want me to? I'll take the first shot at that, and then if you want to add in,
sure,
if that's okay.
Well, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
So we're such open-ended question enthusiasts. I think that's a very good question of, okay, but how do I analyze it, right? How do I deal with that? And in the past, you know, we would have had manual coding sheets. We would have visually scanned through and tried to categorize what are the main things that are happening in this database, and then do counts manually on how many people are saying things that align with those themes. And, you know, if you have a certain amount of data and that's something feasible for you still to do, that's great. But we certainly are now just massive advocates of using technology, finding advanced text analytics platforms that use machine learning and actually go through a natural language processing to go through and figure out, okay, but what's inherent in this message? OPINATOR has an ability within their platform to do that to a certain level. And then, as I mentioned, there's Clarabridge for advanced text analytics. Just depending on, you know, what you need, I think it is important to leverage that technology and make sure you're getting the most out of that feedback. But David, did you have something you wanted to share on that?
Not much. I mean, just to expand on what you just said. You know, having the right technology is super important here because when you do have a great text analytics engine, the kind of things that you're going to be able to do, and of course, it requires some training. You know, the machine has to be, has to learn. I mean, this is done through machine learning, so it's pretty advanced artificial intelligence. But you are going to, it's going to pay off because you're going to be able to, to find out so much more about, what your customers think, about new things that you could be doing, both in terms of direct feedback, experience management, but also looking beyond that, to really generating value. I was just talking to a customer. They want to yeah, they want to get that feedback from their customers, but at the same time, they're interested in in exploring new possibilities for new products, for new features of their products, etc. And you're going to be able to do that, by applying the right technology.
Thank you. Okay, we have a few questions coming up, so this is exciting. Let me go with the second one. I like this question a lot. How can CX be human when a lot of companies are going into help bots and chatbot?
Oh, I love that. That is a great question. David, do you want to go first on that one?
Absolutely, absolutely. Lots of companies get too excited about technology, and the first thing, the easy thing to do is to apply brute force, basically. So when companies, for instance, learned about email, right, back in the day, they started sending out millions of emails to their customers, and of course, spam was born and stuff. So right now, I would say, with some of these technologies, companies are still trying to find out what they're useful for. A chatbot is great, but it's not great for everything. People get tired of interacting with a chatbot by typing, especially if you're on a mobile device. It's not a good experience. It's way better, much more visual, much more intuitive to interact with an OP. And actually, we have lots of fine experiences integrating OPs within chatbots and chatbots within OPs. As I said, we're fully omni-channel. We can integrate in any digital channel whatsoever. So I believe, my personal opinion is that chatbots, people got too excited about them, and they, slowly but surely, companies are going to see that they're useful for some things and not so much for others. And actually, we get many businesses coming to us saying, we would like to combine, the engagement that you can get with an OP with the kind of artificial intelligence that you can have in a chatbot.
Yeah, David, I'll just add my favorite question in response when somebody says we're thinking about a chatbot. I just ask, how well do you think you know your customers? How well are you really understanding their needs? Because to automate something requires some categorization, and categorization means you need to have really analyzed what the conversation is normally about, right? Otherwise, you just frustrate the living daylights out of your customers. So I tend to spend quite a bit of time testing to see whether it's time for a chatbot. I think if you've done a lot of analysis and you've gathered a lot of feedback, you've been able to use technology to truly understand sentiment and emotion and kind of the use cases for a chatbot, that's a great time to do one. I think there is a pretty high risk that you're going to frustrate your customers, and I think you can I often ask people, well, can you think of a time when you interacted with a chatbot and you ended up more frustrated than you were when you started? So just a word of caution on that one. I think they have a great role, and they are inevitable. But to David's point, how fast you adopt it and when you adopt it is kind of a critical business discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie and David. Great insights. Okay, we have a couple of more here. Third one. How do you think the global pandemic will affect the CX industry and the ways companies interact with their customers?
Go first, Leslie.
That's a good one. Sure, yeah, I'll take that. Boy, I wish I had a crystal ball. I'm an economist by training, so I do tend to think about the economic implications of a lot of this. For the CX world, I think it's even more important that we link what we're doing back to the financial ramifications of what we're doing. Those first few slides on the ROI and the impact we can have, I think now more than ever is the time to be paying attention to customer needs. I think internally within organizations, you have to really, I think we all have to step up our game on how we make the case that this is such a critical function. Because if we get viewed as, if research and understanding the customer gets viewed as an optional research expense, I think we're in big trouble. I think when people realize the kinds of insights they can get and the massive return that happens when you can address problems around effort or problems around emotion or just general challenges, I think that's when CX really shines. So that was a good economist answer, I hope, on the one hand. On the other hand, David, what did you want to add?
Absolutely. Question, may I share my screen for a second?
Absolutely. Hang on a second here. I had wandered away from, just hang on one second here. Okay, sorry for the delay. If you start, I will, there we go. There we go. Still have to click yes. Thank you. There you go, David.
Perfect. Yeah, I love this question because, can you see my screen? Huh?
Yes, thanks.
When we started OPINATOR 10 years ago, we had two main principles in mind. The first one, communication is going to be digital. So if you're communicating with your customers in a non-digital way, you got to start thinking right now about how you're going to be able to reach your customers to sell over a digital channel, to market your products, to support them, etc., etc. You know, the companies that figured this out very early on, like Amazon, you know, the greatness of Amazon is that they realized that everything that they were going to do was going to be, you know, done through digital interactions, and they did that 20 years ago. Okay, so that's greatness. The second one was that, you know, the customer experience and how customers interacted with your product, with your services, it was going to be more and more and more important. Again, when you put together those two things, you know, it follows that building, you know, effective, you know, smart, relevant, you know, even profitable digital interactions is essential for success. Right now, what the pandemic is showing us is that this, you know, this was a prediction from Gartner from a few years ago, but, you know, this, which many businesses doubted, all of a sudden became not 85%, but 100%, because we were all confined. So the only way that you could do business was over digital channels. And the way you could interact with your customers, build those, you know, meaningful and potentially, you know, profitable digital interactions, you know, either you had the means or not. And that could mean, you know, the difference between, you know, disappearing or being successful. So I think that right now what is happening, the pandemic, what is doing is accelerating this process. Twitter, they announced yesterday, less than 24 hours ago, you know, all of our employees are going permanently to work from home. Okay, and that means, you know, that means acceleration. This is going to happen faster than you thought. And if you are not prepared, if you cannot build those digital interactions, you know, fast, you know, in a cost-effective way, in a flexible way, you're going to have a problem.
Excellent point.
That was great. Thank you, David and Leslie. Okay, let's see. We have 7 minutes left, and I think we can do 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see. Let's try with the last one actually we have from the chat. What volume of data do you need for text analytics to work effectively? Also, do you think it is possible to pull out new innovations from comments and a shift in behavior? Ooh, that was a good one.
That is. Let me address the first part, and then I'm going to have Valeria, you repeat the second half. So in terms of volume, you know, if you have a few thousand comments, you can still manually handle it, right? The breaking point tends to be after you have a couple thousand. And as soon as you have a couple thousand, then, you know, that's where the technology really kicks into gear. You know, you can use technology on smaller volumes, but as soon as you start slicing and dicing and saying, well, I really want to know what this type of customer believes, very quickly as you start, you know, segmenting and filtering, you get down to too small a number to be usable. So a few thousand is usually the human breaking point, and that's typically where the technology can really take over. Then, of course, the more volume you can have, and it's why it's nice to combine the survey data with other data, because then if you can pull in some of these other sources, now you've got a richer data set. So that's really important. And sure enough, I've now forgotten this. I knew I'd do it. So Valeria, what was the second half?
The second half, it says, also, do you think it is possible to pull out new innovations from comments and a shift in behavior?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're seeing this. We've got a software company right now that we're monitoring their help desk feed. And while clients are putting in requests that they're stuck or something's broken, you know, they often say things like, you know, it'd be really nice if you could put this button on here, or you could do something new and different. So I think the more that's a specific example, but just generally, the more we hear from our customers and their perspective, the more we can innovate and come back around the table and say, well, look, this is what they're telling us, right? So that means our behavior needs to change because this is what they're telling us. David, what do you think on that
one? You want me to take both? I don't know. We have just, I think, 3 minutes left. So, Valeria, I don't know if there are other questions, or you want me to take these two, or you know, I can say something very, very briefly. In terms of you know, the text analytics, the volume of the data set. Yeah, it is true that when, you know, when it's not very large, you can do that manually, right? I was talking to a customer yesterday. You know, they were talking about, you know, a few hundred. It depends on also on how you build the surveys. You know, we don't recommend making, you know, the text field a mandatory field. So you have to allow for some freedom, and, you know, you could be getting, it depends. You could be getting 30%, 40%, 20% of your customers leaving comments. So you have to, you know, make some numbers first. But even if you do that manually, if you're able to do that manually, and it's a, you know, reduced data set, the kind of analytics that you're going to get are not as rich as the ones you would get with OPINATOR, or the combination of OPINATOR plus Clarabridge, because you're going to be able to, you know, to play around with that data, to do simulations, to combine the quantitative and qualitative, etc. So, you know, and then you also need to take into account, you know, how many people you have in your team. If it's just one person, then very likely, you know, it's better to get, you know, aid from technology. You know, if you have several people and you can, you know, spend some time reading comments, etc., then it might be okay. And also, you know, another factor to take into account is the frequency. It's not the same getting, you know, 1,000 per day than 1,000 per month, etc. So when we talk about volume, you always need to combine volume with the frequency of that of your surveys, etc. As for the second one, well, this very morning, you know, less than 6 hours ago, I was talking to a customer that wants to do exactly that. You know, how to drive, you know, how to get insights for new innovations for new products. So I completely agree with what Leslie said. You know, go for it.
Love it. Yes. Well, we have a minute left, and I want to thank you, everyone, for being here, for attending our webinar. Thank you so much, David and Leslie, for those amazing and useful insights. If there is any other question or information we didn't cover, or if you want to discuss anything further, please feel free to reach out. As Leslie mentioned, in the next couple of days, we will send you the recording and also the slides of the session, so you can share them with your team, with your colleagues. And with that said, thank you all very much. We appreciate your time and hope you all stay safe. Bye, all.
Thanks so much, Valeria.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Leslie and Valeria. Bye.
Have a lovely evening.
Bye.